Welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast. Today, Big Trouble in Little Tatooine. Hello everyone, welcome to the Region Free Gamers podcast, the podcast fluent in gaming. My name is Paul Romalo, and with me today, the bad cop to my good cop, Arnaldo Perez.
Hey, everybody. See, Ozzy thought that because you guys did a podcast together, that I would let that stand. But no, sir. I am here to reclaim my rightful throne.
Yes, as the preeminent RFG duo, which sounds way more prestigious than it is when it's two people on. It basically means that the other three were like, I'm not doing this today. Now, originally this was going to be an episode where we talk about what we've been playing lately, because we're all chomping at the bit actually to talk to each other about this stuff, because doing it in our chat group is not quite the same as talking, obviously.
It is also the one time that I'm like, I've played more than one thing.
Yeah.
I have 7 things I want to talk about now.
Exactly. But yeah, unfortunately we had that scheduling snafu, and I mean, Jeff's gonna kill us if he's not on to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake. Yes. He's been absolutely like, I need to talk about this game. And so, yeah, it kind of sucks because talking in our group chat, like I said, that's one thing. But, when I hear that you are now addicted to Slay the Spire, when I type ha 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 in our chat group, it's not quite the same as, laughing at you with my voice. Like when you told me you were 50 hours in, it was literally a knee slapper. I was like, I slapped my knee and I was laughing. I was like,
barely getting started. So that's the other thing, is that I got it on Steam initially, and now I own a second copy of it on the PS4 because my girlfriend is also addicted to it. So we had to I needed my computer, so we had to get a console version so she could play it.
It's so good. It reminds me of every movie where the heroin addict is in a dank apartment sitting on a dirty ass mattress, slumped against the wall playing Slay the Spire. Oh man.
Just one more run, Paul. Just one more run.
So, I mean, yeah, generally speaking, we love the episodes where we talk to each other about what we've been playing, because it's like we're kids again, right? Like we're talking to our friends in school about what video games we're playing and blah, blah, blah. So here's the next best thing. Or possibly even a better thing. This is going to be an episode where you and I, Arnie, we talk about our favorite childhood games.
That's right.
Now, our regular listeners, God love them, they might now be thinking, is this yet another episode where these two idiots talk about Phantasy Star and Legend of Dragoon? The answer is no. We've specifically selected games that we haven't talked about and that we think people might enjoy today, in spite of their age, because as we know, not all retro games are created equal, right?
That's right. Part of me did want to just lie to you and tell you I wasn't going to talk about Legend of Dragoon and then just start talking about it immediately.
Like the wrestler who shows up to the ring and he's wearing a regular shirt, and then he dragon kicks the other guy, takes off his shirt, and then it's the NWO shirt.
The NWO shirt. I'm part of the LWO. That's the... That's
the Latino World Order?
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was actually a thing, wasn't it?
It sure was.
Oh, man.
God. We can't go down this rabbit hole right now, but there were...
Are you kidding me?
There were so many NWOs.
It's amazing, man. We've got one good gimmick. How can we milk the shit out of this and ruin our company is basically what happened, right?
To tie it back into the least popular thing we ever talk about on this podcast, in the last episode of The Last Dance, they finally show when Dennis Rodman went to WCW as a member of the NWO, and it was during the finals.
I couldn't believe it. I could even for Rodman, I had actually forgot about that. Even for Rodman, I was like, wow, dude. Like between game 2 and game 3, you're going to a WCW taping.
Hell yeah.
That's amazing. And I mean, I know he's not taking bumps, but still, like it's just, it's not forget about the potential injury. Like obviously that's not going to happen, but it's just, wow, that's not a good look. Although I have to admit, pretty convincing chair shot he delivered to the back. I don't remember who the wrestler was that he hit. Do you?
Yeah, I think it was DDP.
It was DDP. That's right. Yeah. Frig, man. No wonder he's doing yoga now. So, anyway, before we get to our childhood games, I got to say thank you to our listeners.
Yep.
Especially on an episode like today's, where, it's. To be fair, I did actually do a lot of research last night on the games that I'm going to be talking about. But with that said, this is a little bit more half-assed than our more in-depth kind of efforts.
Yeah.
Now, again, to be fair, though, I often find that our half-assed efforts turn into a full ass of entertainment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if, like me, you enjoy a full ass, then be sure to subscribe. And just as importantly, leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. 5 stars, please. And Arnie, why don't you start us off then? One of your favorite childhood games.
Oh, man. I don't know how many we'll have time for today. So I want to start off with what is probably one of my absolute favorite childhood games. And I have them right here for you, Paul. It's Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2.
Oh, yeah.
These were... no shit, I think this is the first ever time a game, made me buy a console. Because
wow.
I played this at a friend of my mom's house. He had an Xbox, and I played this for, I want to say a couple hours. And I was so blown away that I was like, I need an Xbox. And so me and my mom went to GameStop. I traded in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas and some other stuff for pennies on the dollar. To buy that big green and black hunk of love, and a copy of Knights of the Old Republic. And I honestly think this is the game that I've beaten the most times through. I think I've beaten it at least 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
Because I had to do full Jedi run, full Sith run, a neutral run. I always mixed it up.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is too serious of a topic right now, so edit this out if it is, but my great-grandmother recently passed away, and I vividly remember I would come over to her house during the summer, and she would bring out this shit-tastic CRT is probably 12 inches, and it had a VCR integrated into it, and I would just sit in the living room and just play Knights of the Old Republic 4 hours, sun up to sundown, until my mom came to get me.
Man, those old CRTs, here's the thing. When I started gaming, it was on an old TV in our living room, and the TV was so old. It was one of those with the wooden, surround. It was in a wooden cabinet.
Oh, yeah.
And the TV did not like the game consoles. The Sega Master System was actually kind of ruining the tube.
Yeah.
And so eventually for Christmas, I got a little 13-inch CRT, and it got put in the basement. And, for all the improvements that my gaming experience has, for all the upgrades that I've had over the years,
yeah,
the little 13-inch CRTV is still, for me, my fondest memory.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
Eventually we upgraded to a 26-inch, and playing Mortal Kombat 2 on that thing was amazing. The sprites were huge now.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun. But boy, oh boy, that little 13-inch, it has a special place in my heart.
Yeah, it's funny. In my memories, it's always super HD. I'm oh yeah, this thing looks perfect. And I'm sure if I went back in time, my eyes would bleed. Having to look at that thing for more than a minute.
And sitting friggin' 2 feet from it? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I was this is close enough, right? As I'm pressing my corneas up against the screen. But no, man, it was, I don't know. I was a Star Wars fan. I enjoyed the movies. This was well after the prequel series had come out, which at the time I did not hate. Like as a kid, I was like, oh, whatever. It's not great, but it's no Empire Strikes Back, but it's not the worst thing I've ever seen either.
Yeah, I mean, when kids used to come into the game store that I worked at, and they actually liked Jar Jar Binks, that was an eye opener for me, because like I assumed for several weeks after the movie's release that everybody hated Jar Jar Binks and he was the absolute worst. And then I realized after a little while, I'm like, oh, wait, this movie isn't really for me. Yeah. And neither was the original. Like, these are movies, kind of for kids. Yeah. And hopefully the kids buy the toys and so on and so forth. Yeah,
I see. The thing is, Paul, that my cursed generation is like coming of age now. And they're like, oh, no, the prequels were good. Like, we're changing the entire narrative now. Now the sequels are bad, and then give that like 10, 15 years and people are like, no, these were masterpieces.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But no, so it was really weird for me because when I started playing this game, I had not really delved into the Star Wars universe for a really long time, and so seeing something that was so separated from what the movies were. I think it's set like millennia before the original trilogy. And being able to sort of explore a brand new world with brand new characters, but in a setting that I sort of already felt comfortable in. Like I was like, oh, lightsabers, oh, blasters. Like I know all this stuff.
Yeah.
Was like something else. There's something about this game that just hooked me immediately. Like in a way that very few games aside from Slay the Spire, managed to do. Like, I was within, like, the first hour, I was like, oh, yeah, I definitely need to play more of this.
Yeah.
Have you played it? Like, have you beaten this game?
No, it's, it came out during an era where my gaming was curtailed quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And correct me if I'm wrong, this was an Xbox exclusive, was it not?
Yes. Both of them were.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be another reason why. Xbox, I just never had one. During that era, I had a PS2. You can't really count the Dreamcast because it came out so much earlier. It technically belongs to that generation, but
yeah.
But I had the PS2, and the PS2 was such a dominant platform during that time that there really wasn't any need to get anything else. I mean, I kind of wanted a GameCube, I kind of wanted an Xbox, but I had friends who had those systems, so if I really wanted to play the games on those systems, I could just go to my friends' places and do that. So, yeah, unfortunately, I never played Knights of the Old Republic. It was definitely on my radar, but, unlike you, I didn't rush to GameStop and get the Xbox just for it.
Well, honestly, it's the reason I ask also is because there is a twist in the story, and I don't want to spoil it.
No, I'm aware of the twist, which is by the way another reason I haven't played it, because now that I know the twist, and fair enough, right? Like it's been 20 years or something?
Yes,
almost 20 years. I should have played it in time to kind of avoid the twist, but it is what it is.
I'm hesitant to spoil it even on the podcast, just because I do think the story is sort of dependent on it, in the sense that like if you know what it is going in, the story is a lot less exciting.
Yeah.
But if it just happens and you're like, whoa, because when I was a kid, I was like I fell out of my chair. Mind exploded when it happened.
It's such a good twist, honestly. Like, dude, trust me, if I was you and I was playing this game when I was a kid, I would have felt exactly the same way. No doubt about it. It's awesome.
I also got lucky that another friend of mine also bought an Xbox, and so we were able to play Halo using both of ours. So I was like, oh, okay, this was a good investment. Like, I feel justified now in my use of this because of Halo 2.
Yes.
But no, then the sequel came out, and honestly, I feel like people don't love the sequel as much as the original. I think the original is better. a lot of people had problems with the sequel. I think I was just so young, and I was so, like, the first one was such a big deal to me that when the sequel came out, I was like, it doesn't matter if this thing is, like, absolute dog shit. I'm probably still gonna love it.
Yeah.
And, like, my copy is so old that, like, it still has an EB Games sticker on it.
What?
From when EB Games was a thing in Puerto Rico before it got bought up by the monolith that is GameStop.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, the second one is also good. It's not as good, but I think that it does a lot of things that I really enjoyed from the first one. I think the characters are still really good. The story, for the most part, is really good. And obviously the choices that you get to make. And, like, I like that I think this was the first time I'd experienced a BioWare RPG.
Yeah.
So the choice system and how, like, if you're a Sith, it, like, truly affects your character's appearance. Like, you look like the more evil you are, like, the more deranged and like a walking corpse you look.
The less sleep it looks like you got.
Yeah, exactly. And people are still like, "Oh, hello, how are you doing?" And it pans to you, and you're like, like evil incarnate standing before them, and you're like, "Hi,
are you okay?
Yes,
buddy?
I will look for your bantha." Like,
does it have, like, all those kind of side quests that are, like, does it have a lot of side quests, I guess is what I'm asking?
if I'm recalling correctly, which I could not be, it has some, but not as many as you would expect in, like, an RPG nowadays. Like, this is not like Witcher 3 sort of territory. But I think, like, honestly, in that same sense, I kind of enjoy them more because the few that are there are very well scripted and are very well planned out. I specifically remember in 2, I believe, it could be 1, but I think it's 2. You have a ship, and at one point you bring in, like, a relic onto your ship, and you can ignore that relic for the entire game. And I don't think anything happens. I don't think at any point you're forced to touch it, but if you open it, you're, like, sucked into a completely different world where you have to, like, do a series of quests for, like, 2 warring factions, and you have to choose who you support.
Yeah. Interesting.
And so stuff like that, I'm like, oh my god, this is so cool. Like, clearly they, like, really built a narrative around these side quests.
Yeah, and also kind of like a believable... The problem I'm having now with RPGs, I'm playing one that, you know, the side quests, you want to complete them because you get cool items and there are all kinds of material incentives. But as far as its relation to the narrative, yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal because, like, with the narrative, things are often kind of like life and death. And yet the characters have enough time to go do these fetch quests and so on. And it's just kind of like, there's a little bit of a dissonance there that I'm not a huge fan of. That kind of solution where you have a relic and it transports you to another world, that's really cool. That's like, you know, Star Trek Next Generation.
Yeah.
Inner Light episode where Picard
it's like,
lives
oh no,
an entire
these guys
other
are
life
trapped
and...
inside of this container, and, like, this is all they know is this. There's also, because you just reminded me of that, there's also a card game that's built into it that I loved as a kid. And it just sort of harkens back to that time. I think, again, The Witcher, I think, is the one to have done this most recently with Gwent, but where there were RPGs that just had, like, a little game within the game that you get super addicted to. The only one I can think of off the top of my head besides those two is Triple Triad in Final Fantasy VIII.
Arguably the best one of all time.
Yes. But, like, stuff like that, I used to spend so many hours just playing these stupid games just to win fake money, right? Like, it's like, oh, I don't need this, but I am enjoying this game so much.
Dude, how many hours did I burn on Blitzball? Oh my god. You know, what a great game Blitzball was. I know our guest Kelly, she's been on a couple times, and she actively dislikes Blitzball.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly like, how is it possible that you don't want to play against the Luca goers?
Truly the greatest professional sports team name of all time. They really go.
Yes.
But yeah, man, like, Knights of the Old Republic, I wanted to do it for this episode because I feel like I guess the theme I was going for is like games that we'll probably never do an episode on.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
An excuse to talk about it. Knights of the Old Republic, I think cumulatively, both of these, because the good thing about these two is neither one of them is like particularly long. I want to say that like 40 hours will get you through either one of them.
Oh, so good.
And I played them just incessantly. I've played through both of them multiple times to do different like runs and stuff like that. And I just never got tired of them. I don't know if it's the kid in me because I have not played them in like a decade or so. But I feel like if I pop them in now, I might still just fall right back into that trap and go through them multiple times again.
You almost certainly would. I can say from experience that you definitely would. The finishing multiple times and like, you know, the fact that this was kind of, you know, really what it is, it's kind of the first time. It's that first time thing where you encounter this specific type of game. Because this is a very different game from Legend of Dragoon, which I think was your first RPG, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is a very different game than that. And when you encounter this kind of game for the first time and you're a kid and you have all that energy and time, it really lends itself to going through these multiple playthroughs. I can totally see how that would have happened.
Yeah. I think also because I was not like, this is the other thing about this episode that we haven't talked about, but like you and me are like completely different eras of gaming.
Yeah.
And so you got to go through Phantasy Star and understand that like, oh, sci-fi and an RPG, like that works. But like for me, it was like, oh, Legend of Dragoon and Final Fantasy, like RPGs are fantasy. Like they're medieval, they're like swords and monsters and trolls and stuff like that. And then I finally played this and I'm like, oh no, like spaceships are cool too in RPGs.
Oh, and how? If I could have them in every RPG, I would.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the fantasy trope, let's just be honest, it's tired.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to see another Hobbit. I don't.
Yeah. So this was the one that opened my eyes to that whole fact, where it was like, before this, it was like, oh yeah, RPGs are long, they have orcs, they have swords, and I have magical powers. Like, that's what an RPG is. And then I played this game and I'm like, I also now want lightsabers and spaceships in every single one.
In Knights of the Old Republic, is it just force powers that are sort of like your magic? Is there any other kind of magic?
So the way it works, it's the BioWare sort of trope, I think, where you can set up your attacks. Like all your attacks are like mapped to different buttons. Like you have your main weapon, you have a secondary weapon, because I think you can dual wield or you can single wield with like something else.
Yeah.
And then you also can pause the action to stack multiple actions in a row, like if you want to do specific things. And then you can use items, and you have force powers. You also have allies that are also Jedi, so they also have force powers. But your force powers are sort of dictated by which side of the alignment you fall on. Like if you're super good, I think you get like a lightsaber throw that comes back to you and a force push. And then if you're evil, you get like a force choke where you like lift people off the ground. And force lightning, which is the best force power.
Of course.
Which is why I was like, I'm always going to be evil because I just want to shoot force lightning. Like
The only thing the force lightning doesn't have going for it is that the force, like the manipulation of objects with the force, just visually is actually really, really cool.
Yes.
I know lightning is also really cool, but there's just something about like, you know, the push and the guy like flying against the wall.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like the old kung fu movies with like the chi powers and so on.
The lightsaber throws were also really fun for me. Like just watching something boomerang back into somebody's hand, I was always like, "That's so cool!" Like, like when Luke pulled the lightsaber out of the snow to kill when in Empire Strikes Back when he's hanging upside down and he has to pull his lightsaber out of the snow.
Yeah,
like I was like on the edge of my seat the entire time. I was like, it's moving. But yeah, man, Knights of the Old Republic, highly recommend. I think 1 is relatively cheap. 2 might be like in the $20-ish range.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
I know. I mean, for me, that's like a mortgage payment, you know, like I'm not paying that. Even though this sticker does say $44.99 on it, so I must have gotten my mom to plunk that chunk of change down for me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, you know, with the amount of hours you put into it, what can you say, man? It's money well spent, right?
Yeah, pennies on the dollar, as they say.
All right, man. Let's take a little break here, and when we come back, I will talk about one of my favorite childhood games. All right, everyone, we're back. And for my childhood favorite game, and again, these aren't necessarily favorite games, but they're definitely games that made an impression on me.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about Kung Fu Kid for the Sega Master System.
Kung Fu Child. like I told you during the break, and I think this holds true. This is like if Alex Kidd was just cool. Like if he wasn't a lame.
Okay, I don't. You people who hate on Alex Kidd, you're not entirely wrong. Like, I get it, but for any kid who grew up with Alex Kidd in Miracle World, let me tell you, they will defend it. They will defend it to the death, and I'm one of them. That game was amazing.
Fair enough.
And for all of its ridiculous design choices, like the rock, paper, scissors, and so on, you know, for all that stuff, like for a kid, again, who has like infinite time and so on, what a great game to have. Because it kept me entertained for, what, 9 months or something like that? It took me forever to beat that game.
Would you say that Alex Kidd is like the de facto Master System mascot?
Yeah. I don't think there's any arguing about that. Thank God they brought out Sonic, because if they had stuck with Alex Kidd, that probably would have been a little bit of an issue. Nobody quite knew what he was, and even through the different Alex Kidd sequels, he changed so much. It was never really a consistent look, unlike Mario, who, you know, Nintendo actually knew what they were doing there.
Yeah, he's the second coolest kid behind Jason Kidd.
With the 2Ds and everything, too.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to Kung Fu Kid. I could have gone with Alex Kidd, actually, now that I think about it. and it probably would have even been more interesting. But Kung Fu Kid, and I wanted to talk about a game that was accessible and fun even now. And Kung Fu Kid, I think, really fits that bill. So what I learned about Kung Fu Kid is that it's actually a sequel. It's a sequel to the Sega SG-1000 game. Now, the SG-1000, for those of you who don't know, is like the Japanese predecessor to the Master System. And so you could play SG-1000 games on the Master System, but there were games developed for the Master System that weren't necessarily backwards compatible. So Kung Fu Kid, a sequel to the SG-1000 game called Dragon Wang, based on a 1982 Asian pornography film of the same name. That is not true. But
this was going to be breaking news until you added that last part.
Let me tell you though, man, if I was going to be in a porn now, I'd be Dragon Wang. Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
10 out of 10 porn name.
But yeah, Kung Fu Kid, you know, I'm going to tell you why it's a great game. When I was a kid, first of all, I never actually owned it. I only ever rented it. And I think, like you, Arnie, a lot of my fondest memories from video games when I was a kid just come from like going to the rental store, and renting a game multiple times. And I think I was wondering yesterday about why that might be the case. And I think it's because with rental games, they never overstayed their welcome. Yeah, you never looked at this game on the shelf, you know, and were disappointed that you owned it. Because after a while you get sick of every game, right? That's just how it is. Yeah. And so you rent this game, you enjoy it, you take it back, and you never have that kind of negative association of being bored with it.
I think
am I off base here?
No, I think that it sort of cuts both ways, right? Like, I think that a lot of people, if you rented a game and it was bad, you never forgot that game because you wasted your rental on it. You're like, this was my whole weekend, and now it's nothing. It's the worst. But if the game was like even slightly good, you were like, I love this. I think that the nature of the rental being fleeting like that meant that you felt forced to put a lot of time into those games for the short window that you had it.
Oh yeah.
And so they really made that impression on you, especially if you rented it again, because that was like, this game is so good that I'm going to play it again, even though I could get any other game that I wanted.
Yeah.
I put you first and foremost in my life, game.
Yep. And because you didn't own them, I think there was also that kind of feeling of wanting to own it if it was really good.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you could only get so many games per year, right?
Yeah.
For me, it was usually like 2 or 3 games per year. Maybe a little bit more if we got like bargain bin stuff.
Yeah.
Which happened with the NES. But like during the Master System era, we actually did have a video store that rented out Master System games, which was really cool because I can't imagine that was a very common thing.
Yeah. I think the earliest, I mean, born in 91, so I think by the time I was going to rental stores, the earliest I ever saw was like Super Nintendo games. Yeah. Like, I don't think I ever saw an NES game on a video store shelf.
Yeah, no, that figures. The NES games were hugely popular.
Yeah.
At least, when I was growing up, the video stores had like entire walls just filled with NES games. But I was lucky, I got to rent Master System games too, and Kung Fu Kid was one of them, which is great because you know what? It's not really the kind of game that you want to own. It's a little bit easy. If you were to pick it up and play it now, I don't think it would take you longer than an hour to kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
There's a long play that we were just watching on the break, and the dude finishes it in like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is actually kind of par for the course for that era. Like if you look through long plays, I was watching a long play of Legend of Cage for the NES because it's kind of similar to Kung Fu Kid in that it has like the huge floaty jumps and so on. And it again, 15 minutes, like the guy's done, right? But if you were to pick it up and play it now, it would definitely take you longer than 15 minutes. You gotta figure it out, right?
Yeah. There is a sort of, I think that's sort of the hidden beauty of like those early games, that a lot of people just remember spending hours and hours and hours and hours trying to beat a game that they could not beat. And now with the advent of the internet and people who are good at games, you're like, oh, that game's like 20 minutes long.
Yeah, I know, right?
Like that's how I felt about the original Contra. I remember playing it and being like, this is impossible. Like, this would take me like weeks to finish. And then I saw somebody do like a no death run, and it was like maybe half an hour, and I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I know, right? We're all terrible. I saw someone doing, back when we did our Contra episode way back, which by the way is still one of my favorite episodes that we've ever done. I strongly encourage people to go download it if they haven't. When we did that one, I watched a playthrough of Hardcore. I didn't yet own Hardcore. I do now, thankfully, because that game's fucking great.
Yeah.
And the guy doing the long play, like, it was just, he made it look so easy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, damn, am I remembering this incorrectly? Was this game really that easy? And it actually pushed me to pick up Hardcore again, because I'm like, well, this looks kind of beatable. And then I got it, and I invited a buddy over.
Yeah.
We couldn't even get by the first level. We did it for like, I think we played it for like half an hour or 40 minutes or something.
Yeah.
And you know what? We might have actually beat the first level. I can no longer remember. But I just remember that it was extremely difficult. And I was like, okay, this is kind of the Contra Hardcore experience that I remember from when I was a kid. It's amazing how hard we're avoiding talking about Kung Fu Kid.
Kung Fu Kid. I was gonna ask you because I think it's relevant, and I realized I didn't say this when I was talking. But how old were you when you played Kung Fu Kid?
I'm gonna guess 10.
Yeah. See,
Yeah.
like Knights of the Old Republic I was on the older side of childhood, so like maybe 12 or 13. But I
Yeah.
think that the age that you play it at sort of gives away a little bit of your experience with it. I think that like it makes sense that like I would pick an insane RPG at like 12 and you would pick Kung Fu Kid when you were 10. Like that's probably what I was playing. Like similar styled games at that age.
Yeah, I agree. And Kung Fu Kid, you know, to its credit, like, you know, it's just got good controls. You know, it's kind of like Kung Fu Master or Kung Fu on the NES. It's you know, there's one plane. It's not like Double Dragon where you kind of move in this pseudo 3D, you know, beat 'em up. You know, you can kick high, you can kick low, but really the secret sauce lies in the jumping in the game. The Kung Fu Kid, Wang, sorry, he can jump 3/4 of the screen up. So every time you jump, if you hold the jump button, of course, to jump higher, it kind of has that like old kung fu movie feel to it.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I was a kid, so the multicultural station in Toronto, which at the time was CFMT Channel 4. I think it's called Omni 1 now for anybody in Toronto listening to this. They might know what I'm talking about. But CFMT on Saturday nights, and sometimes on Saturday afternoons or Sunday afternoons, but definitely every Saturday night, they had an Asian movie, right?
Okay.
And once every couple months, the Asian movie would be one of those kung fu movies.
Yeah.
And so we would watch Hockey Night in Canada. We'd watch the Toronto Maple Leafs lose in yet another crippling manner. But during intermissions, after, you know, because the intermissions back then weren't terribly entertaining, we would flip over to the Asian movie. And if it was a kung fu movie, we'd sometimes miss some of the hockey game because kung fu movies were amazing.
Yeah.
It's guys like flying through trees and doing like super kicks in midair and so on. And, oh my God, it was amazing.
See, I love the fact that you guys had like a dedicated multicultural channel. I remember like back in the day, there was like when you live in Puerto Rico, like you get American cable, and I would always tell people like it was so annoying watching American channels because they would have commercials for things that we did not have. And so it was so annoying. It was so annoying being like, try the new DQ Blizzard. And I was like, oh my God, that looks great. It's like, there's no Dairy Queens here. Like,
oh my God.
But I remember there was like a couple of local channels. Like there was like 3 or 4 like local channels that you would watch. And every once in a while you'd get anime on them. Like the Saturday morning block sometimes had like children's anime dubbed terribly in Spanish. Like it was horrendous. But I do remember like watching random episodes of like Doraemon and like Dragon Ball Z and stuff.
Oh, right on. See, you think the Spanish dubbing is terrible. I love Spanish dubbed anything, and specifically Central American, South American Spanish. I don't know about European Spanish, but I would imagine that the European Spanish, like those guys drink a lot less caffeine is what I'm getting at.
Yes.
The Latino, like the Latin America, South America Spanish during, oh my God, dude, during soccer games.
Oh, it's the best. Oh, that is the best.
We would switch over to the Spanish broadcast if we could, either the Spanish or the Portuguese, because the Portuguese are pretty close, but not quite that over the top. But we would, you know, the English guys, and to be fair, the English guys also, they have like a different kind of hilarity. Yeah. So, oh man, this is quite the digression from Kung Fu Kid, but here we go. So my wife and I, we were in, oh my God, I can't remember what country. Oh, we were in Hawaii actually. And there was an English soccer game on, and the guy was calling it. One guy made a pass, and the commentator was like, "Oh, what a sumptuous through ball." And then another guy scored a goal, and he's like, "Oh, he scored that with an air of nonchalance."
Jesus Christ.
So, you know, the English guys also have their comedic value when they're using phrases like that to describe soccer play, but the but the soccer, like the Latin American soccer guys losing their shit, we would listen to that on purpose, even if we didn't understand half of what they were saying. We understood enough.
Yeah.
Kung Fu Kid.
Kung Fu Kid.
So the other, again, with Kung Fu Kid, you have the big jumps. It reminds you of the Kung Fu movies, which is awesome. The other cool thing about it that I hadn't quite encountered up to that point, and I realize in retrospect actually is not a feature but a flaw, is that on stage 6, you just fight a boss rush. It's just 5 straight bosses. And so
insane, by the way, like
which is nuts. Like I don't remember that ever happening. But I realize now that they probably actually wanted to put more game into it and just kind of rushed it out. But you know what? Great. Because the parts of the game where you're walking around and beating up random dudes, okay, at best. But when you fight the bosses, again, it's like that Kung Fu movie feel. Like specifically the 5th boss, the last one in the boss rush, he's particularly satisfying because he behaves a lot like Wang, the main character. Can't forget his name. And it turns into this sweet, like, Big Trouble in Little China kung fu fight with, like, these 2 guys flying at each other constantly and doing martial arts.
Yeah.
And, by the way, Big Trouble in Little China, that scene that I'm referring to, the character in that fight, also named Wang.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
And in Kung Fu Kid, the final boss, clearly Lo Pan from Big Trouble in Little China. And I know Lo Pan is like, that has to do with Chinese mythology, and it's not specific to Big Trouble in Little China. But like, maybe the makers of Kung Fu Kid saw this movie. I don't know. I checked to see which one came first.
A sumptuous homage, if you will.
Hey, there you go.
Jesus Christ.
And so you have to remember, this is how I saw it as a kid, right? Like somebody playing this today for the first time, they won't see Big Trouble in Little China.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, I totally saw that and I loved it because I loved that movie.
I think that is the beauty of it though, right? Like, I think ultimately, I don't know, people collect for different reasons, but I sort of collect to try and recapture those like childhood experiences. And so I get that now from games I never played growing up. But going back to games that we grew up playing, I think it's always a little bit disappointing. Even if you're extremely satisfied, it just never gets up to that level ever again.
It can't.
Yeah.
It can't. And that's fine, right? Like, you can't completely recapture the magic, but you can definitely get a taste of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's kind of all we need.
Yeah. I think, I think there is a small satisfaction to just being able to boot up Kung Fu Kid or Knights of the Old Republic whenever you want and just be like, I like this. This is a warm blanket. This is the cup of hot chocolate, if you will, for the soul that I need right now. With Kung Fu Kid, especially because it's not a great time commitment. Yeah. Like, I can kind of have that hot chocolate and it doesn't take me longer than 45 minutes. Yes, that is true.
Know? Also, the boss rush. And so, apologies to Chris and Shane over on the Retro Hangover podcast. The bosses don't explode, during the boss rush, which is a shame because we love our exploding bosses.
Yes, that is a failure on the part of the developers.
But the next best thing, when you beat the bosses, I don't even remember what it was like for the other bosses, but I don't think it's the same. The bosses in the boss rush, when you beat them, they curl up into a fetal position. And it looks hilarious.
That's amazing.
And it's even better because there's no frames of animation, right? Like, you kick the boss.
It's just a static image.
Yeah, like 1 second they're standing, and then the next second it's like, oof. They're just like on the ground, curled up. And it's every single one of them, and it's great.
That's awesome.
It makes me laugh every single time. And one more thing I'm just gonna note about it too. Because this is the game that just reading about it just kept on giving. Let me tell you, so doing research, or more specifically yesterday, I was doing some editing for the show. And I think in the course of about an hour, I got maybe 3 minutes of editing done. And the reason is because YouTube are giant jerks. I went to go look up, you know, a piece of video game music to use like on the interludes, you know, between our breaks for that particular episode. And of course, you look on the right side of the screen, and YouTube has all these suggestions of things for you to. It was like an hour of me watching old 70s and 80s anime intros.
Oh Lord.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm not gonna say it wasn't time well spent.
Oh,
it
of
was,
course.
But I would have rather got some editing done. So it's similar when I'm doing research for these games, like the kind of things that pop up and random facts. It took way longer. I was expecting to read about Kung Fu Kid for like half an hour. Yeah. No, like with all the sidetracking and watching of videos and so on and so forth, like it took me like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And what all of that preamble leads to is that there is a Brazilian version of Kung Fu Kid, as you're probably aware. Master System, huge in Brazil.
Crouching Tiger, Hidden Master System, I'm sure it's called.
You're close. I don't actually remember what it's called. It's called like the Kung Fu of Sapo Juli. And Sapo Juli was a Brazilian I don't even know if it's a cartoon character or specifically a toy.
Yeah.
But it's a cartoon frog. And
oh my God,
his sort of like attack was taking off his shoes and making people smell his horrible smelling shoes. And they palette swapped him into 3 different Master System games. They palette swapped him into Astro Warrior, where I think he actually attacks with his shoes. It's like, I think Astro Warrior originally, like you're firing bullets from a ship.
Yeah.
And no, instead it's Sapo Juli, and he's like tossing smelly ass shoes at people. And in Kung Fu Kid, they only palette swap him, so it's no longer Wang, it's Sapo, and he's fighting the exact same enemies. So it's like this frog in like a Kung Fu movie.
Yeah.
Man, it's amazing. Also, you mentioned on the break, and it's worth mentioning here before we take another break.
Yeah.
Soundtrack.
Yes,
for
the
Kung Fu
soundtrack
Kid.
is excellent.
Yeah, shockingly good. If you play it, I can just about guarantee that you will be humming the main level, like the first main level song in your head. It's super catchy. The first 2 levels actually, or the music introduced on the 3rd level, it's just really, really catchy.
I'm always pleasantly surprised when I go back to like Master System, even NES stuff. I don't know why. I think it's because since I didn't grow up with it, like I consider Super Nintendo to be ancient, and so when I think of like, oh, it's Master System, I'm like, oh, so it's like a stone slab that they like programmed commands into. And then I watch something, I'm like, this looks great. Like,
yeah. With Kung Fu Kid especially, like it's super colorful.
Yes.
You know, it's not displeasing to look at. It's very crisp, very colorful. There's a lot of cool artwork. There's like a big dragon mural in one section of the game during a boss fight that's really cool. Also worth mentioning. So this is another rabbit hole I fell into while reading about this game. I am pretty sure that this is the first game to feature wall jumping. And I remember this too as a kid. The fact that you could jump off walls was such a cool mechanic because there are levels that have quite a bit of verticality.
Yeah. And
in order to reach like the next screen, you kind of have to jump off the wall and then, you know, go vertical.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. Like it adds just that little bit of extra freedom of movement. You can also jump off the walls when you're fighting bosses. And you know, I know that in Super Mario, and okay, actually let me ask you this. Did you know that you could wall jump in the original Super Mario Brothers?
I did not know that.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that like 5% or less of gamers actually know this. It's actually a glitch not built into, but it's actually a glitch with the engine that they used for Super Mario Brothers. So in Super Mario Brothers, if you jump at a wall, there is a 1 frame window. It's extremely difficult to pull off, but there is a 1 frame window where you can jump off the wall. And basically what that means is that you can just do like a little extra jump.
Yeah.
And it's not terribly useful. in Super Mario Brothers. Like, it's a glitch. Eventually, with Mario 64, they kind of built the wall jump into the game.
Yeah.
So I'm reading about Kung Fu Kid, and I'm like, I wonder if this was the first game with wall jumping, because it's pretty old. It's 1987, right? And I'm pretty sure it is. You know, like, with the wall jump kind of being a purposeful feature and not a glitch, because, you know, Ninja Gaiden came out later. Rastan, whatever, came out for the Master System. That also had a wall jump, but that was 88. Strider also came out later. And I could not find another game with a wall jump that they included in the game on purpose. And it's a pretty cool feature in this game. So
yeah. Well, now you've opened yourself up to somebody being like, actually.
Oh, dude. I couldn't. I was wondering whether even to mention it, which is why.
Haunted
which
House
is why I
for the
did the
Atari
disclaimer.
2600 features a wall jump.
Let me tell you, no Atari 2600 game features a wall jump. I am very, very confident in saying that, and it's why I included the disclaimer about Super Mario Brothers, because you know, I don't count that as a proper wall jump. It's kind of like a useless thing in the game. Yeah, and it's a glitch. Yeah. And if I didn't mention it, somebody with that voice was going to be like, hold on.
Push their glasses up. Well, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, first game with the wall jump, man. Kung Fu Kid. Who knew? Who knew that Kung Fu Kid would have so much to offer us? And yet, we avoided talking about it as much as possible.
We do. El Nene Kung Fu in Spanish.
Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll move on to your next game. All right, everyone, we're back. Arnie, I'm really hyped to hear about this next game.
Yeah, this is one, honestly, that I forgot about until we started talking about doing this episode. It's Flying Dragon for the N64.
Oh, yeah.
This a game, I should mention, released in 1998 that did not make our bracket, so clearly invalid. I will not recognize these results anymore.
Our entire project going on for over a year is just invalidated now.
But no, Flying Dragon is a one-on-one fighting game developed by Culture Brain, which I had to like practice saying that because I was fucking it up constantly.
Were you calling it Cut Your Brain?
I was like Culture Brain, and I was like, no, that's not right. But no, Flying Dragon is like Kung Fu Kid for you, is a game that I never owned. I just rented it religiously, like over 10 times easily. I remember because my parents got divorced when I was 3, so I got to skip all the trauma part and just enjoy the 2 Christmases, 2 birthdays situation.
If you're gonna do it, that's the way.
Parents, if you're thinking about it, do it early. But so, like, my mom got me a PS1, and then I had an N64 at my dad's place. So whenever I would go to my dad's house, like, that's where I'd play all my N64 games. And like most families, you know, I would go see him, like, on the weekends. So it was Blockbuster time. Like, you go to Blockbuster, you rent a movie, you rent a game, and, like, you're set. Like, you don't have to watch your child anymore. They're good. They're self-sufficient now. And Flying Dragon, I don't even know why, because Flying Dragon is not a game that, like, really anyone knows unless you're collecting for the N64. But something about it, when I saw it, I was just like, this is the game. I need this game. Like, I didn't realize how anime as hell of a kid I was, I guess, until Flying Dragon came into my life. I was like, Robot Sumo Wrestler, this is the game I want.
This was before the Vincent cosplay, right?
Yes, this was before. Yes. This was before I was truly kawaii, as they say. But yeah, so it's a one-on-one fighting game, but Culture Brain has done this thing that you sort of turned me on to, that Flying Dragon is like a running series that they had all the way back to the NES, and it's always been sort of a fighting game meets RPG kind of thing. We saw the SNES version, which I think you said that you also rented a lot as a kid, Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah, like my first experience with Flying Dragon was actually on the NES, where I don't remember if it's called Flying Dragon or Flying Warrior or Flying Warriors or something like that. And we literally just looked up the video. I think it's Flying Dragon, the Secret Scroll.
That's what it is.
And yeah, and so I rented that game quite a bit. And it's like you said, it's this weird... It is quite unique. Like, I don't know what was going on at Culture Brain, but like they just kind of made this very weird series of like fighting game / RPG. Like, so Flying Dragon, and we'll digress here for a second, kind of, sort of, but Flying Dragon for the NES, I think, is where it all started. And so it's like, again, like Kung Fu or Kung Fu Kid, where you have like the single plane of movement, and you're like, you know, single kick guy dies, and so on and so forth. But then you have these one-on-one fights where it looks on the face of it like Street Fighter or Street Fighter 2 or whatever. But it's like you have to like time your button presses to hit certain targets on the character. And they kind of move around in this like Kung Fu movie way where they have these big jumps and everything's kind of like flashy, you know, for an NES game. And then Ultimate Fighter for the SNES, they renamed it for that release because, you know, let's be as confusing as we can.
Of course.
Ultimate Fighter, it's even more RPG. And we were seeing that, you know, you have attack option and dodge and defend and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
In between these kind of levels where you're actually fighting like it's an action game. It is so weird.
Yeah, Flying, and then when it comes to the N64 release, like that one is truly one-on-one, like Street Fighter style fighting, obviously 3D. And then it has like these little RPG elements embedded into it as you go along. I think, if I remember correctly, there's 2 modes in the game, and they feature like slightly different characters. But, you know, it was just for me, it was such a weird game for me to get into. Like, even looking back on it, I'm like, this does not fit the pattern. Like, fighting, for some reason, I was like, in my regular life, like when I got to buy a game, it was fighting games not even in the conversation. When I got to rent a game, it was Marvel vs. Capcom and Flying Dragon. Like, my child brain makes no sense. But this one was, I remember like renting it, and I remember beating it with multiple characters, and I would still go back and rent it again. And it's one of those that, like, as I've been collecting, I've always been like, I want to use eBay and like online stuff as little as possible. I want to go out and like find stuff, you know, and as I find it, like, I'll acquire it. And Flying Dragon is one of those that I'm like, it's like $17. I just need to go on eBay and buy it and just make myself happy for a week. Like, it's definitely one that I don't even think, like, a lot of games on this podcast that we talk about, I'm like, go out, buy it, like, enjoy it. I don't know that Flying Dragon is that game. Like, I don't think I can in good conscience be like, yes, spend $20 on this N64 fighting game. Like, that sounds like a terrible idea. But
no, I disagree. I respectfully disagree. I think anything $20 or less, you pick it up.
You can take a flyer on
it. You can take a flyer on it. Pick up Flying Dragon. It's weird.
See, now we've just single-handedly spiked the price of Flying Dragon. There's some guy
we're not quite Metal Jesus yet.
There's some guy out there who had his he's like, my N64 set is almost complete. I just need Bomberman Second Attack and Flying Dragon. He goes online, it's like $70. No! But no, man, Flying Dragon was... I honestly... The only regret I have about renting that game so much is that I did not have friends to play it with. And
Yeah.
I feel like I must have looked like an insane person looking back on it, like renting all of these fighting games that I had no one to play with.
Oh, they don't know that.
Well, fair enough, but I
You
feel
might
like
be the most popular kid in school for all they know.
it's like, man, this kid is he's really living the life.
Yeah, it must be that cosplay. So popular.
I could only see out of one eye because my hair was hanging over the other one. Like, this is great. But yeah, man, there's not much I can say about Flying Dragon. Like, it really speaks to itself. It's like 3D, it's anime as hell, and it's a fighting game. Like, you know, if you're gonna know, Flying Dragon is definitely one of those games. Like, within like 5 minutes of playing it, you know if you like it or you hate it.
Yeah, and it really all depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Like, if you're picking it up and playing it today. So we also talked about on the N64 Mace.
Yes.
What is the subtitle for this game? It's Mace.
The Dark Age or something?
Yes, thank you. I kept thinking The Dark Project, and I'm like, no, that's Thief. We've done an episode on Thief. No, it's Mace the Dark Age.
Yeah.
And so look, you can pick up Mace the Dark Age, and if you're expecting a good game, forget it, right? But what Mace the Dark Age brings is it brings that sweet, sumptuous even, bad game experience that, you know, sometimes you crave, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you want to play a game and be like, oh my god, this is terrible.
Yeah.
I played it with a buddy of mine. We got like, I don't know, half an hour out of it or something, and it was a great half hour.
Yeah.
And if Mace the Dark Age was available for $20 and I could get like a bad game half an hour out of it, I would do that in a heartbeat.
Plunk it down
Now,
for Mace.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Flying Dragon, I have to admit, looks a bit better than Mace, but it's not without its comedic value.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the things that they say before and after the fights. It's stupid stuff like, I will win. And the other guy's like, no, you won't.
How dare you, sir?
Yeah. The names of the characters. What was that robot's name again?
Oh god, I have to look it up. It
was just like a pile of extra syllables for, you know, seemingly no reason. I couldn't even believe it.
Oh, Robo no Hana. That's his name.
Robo no Hana.
The Yokozuna of Robot Sumo.
Oh my god. Robot Sumo. That would do pretty well, actually.
That was honestly, I think, like, that was a big thing when I played it. I was like, there's a Robot Sumo character, and, like, officially my favorite character. Like, without question. I feel like Flying Dragon is, like, pretty much every game we talk about, but Flying Dragon definitely is you need to experience it yourself sort of deal. Like, I can sit here and talk to you about how all the voices for all the characters are in Japanese, and I think slightly sped up. But it won't really hit you until you start playing it and you get to hear, like, what must be like 3 sentences worth of dialogue to then have like a box appear that's like, I won the match.
Yeah, exactly. So we didn't spend too much time on that one. Why don't we not take a break then? I'll move on to my next one.
Sounds like a plan.
Which is a game, and this one I don't think I rented as a kid. I think a buddy of mine owned it. And it actually ended up being a game that we all really loved. So, you know, when you're a kid, right? Like, and you're getting video games as presents from relatives or, you know, people who aren't your parents. Because with your parents, you can write your letter to Santa and then get the game that you actually want.
Yeah. Whereas
your relatives, you know, they're less privy to these desires. And so they just pick up whatever, right?
Yeah.
And as you would imagine, this is how movie-based games were so successful, right?
Yeah.
So poor little Jimmy, he gets Back to the Future from his well-meaning uncle. And meanwhile, Back to the Future for the NES is just like this giant pile. Absolutely terrible. Not so with Willow for the NES. Willow, of course, based on the movie Willow, is actually a good game. It's actually really good. So what it is, it's a top-down, basically like a Zelda clone.
Okay.
Right? It's actually more like Crystallis than Zelda. The dungeons are sporadic in Willow. There aren't very many of them.
Yeah.
Most of the fighting is kind of done over the main world. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it's better than Crystallis or even Zelda.
Mm-hmm.
But, as kids, we played whatever was available. And Willow was pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Considering we didn't have Crystallis available yet. And Zelda was kind of, we'd already played the crap out of that.
Yeah.
The difference is that Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, this is a game that I've never played myself, but I've seen it come up more than once on people's, this is a game you think would not be great and is actually really good.
Yeah.
So I've always, it's one that I've been on the lookout for a while, and I think it's not surprising to hear you say that you sort of latched onto it and had a really good time with it, because it seems like it's quality.
Yeah, we all did. And it's got pedigree. It's kind of a weird game because, first of all, it's made by Capcom,
mm-hmm.
right? And at that time in the NES era, Capcom, you could expect a certain level of quality. There really weren't any duds, I don't think, with Capcom around that time. If you saw that purple frame around the box, you knew you were getting something reasonable. And the development pedigree is there. It was planned by Akira Kitamura, who did Mega Man 2. He did the planning, I think, for Legendary Wings as well, which is another kind of underrated game.
Mm-hmm.
A bit of a mess with the slowdown, Legendary Wings, but still, it's a shoot 'em up on the NES, which, not something that came up terribly often.
Yeah.
Music done by Harumi Fujita. He did the music for Bionic Commando, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And it kind of has that very distinct Capcom NES. It uses those sound effects that they use a lot in their games. It feels very Capcom. Willow does, that is. So, it's got the pedigree there. And what people suspect, nobody knows if it's true, but it makes sense to me, is that Capcom was actually developing a Zelda clone, and what they did was they got the Willow license and kind of grafted it onto that game.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason people think that, and the reason that I think I agree with it too, is that the actual tie-in to the movie, it's pretty loose.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the stuff that happens in the game doesn't necessarily happen in the movie, and it doesn't happen kind of in the order that it happens in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually good. The game doesn't really suffer for it at all. There's enough of a nod to the movie. There's, the main character, the main antagonist, Bavmorda, is still the final boss in the game. Mad Mardigan's in the game. Sorsha, everybody's there. There are scenes from the movie that are still in the game as well.
Mm.
The part in the movie where Sorsha has Mad Mardigan drink the love potion and then he falls in love with her and so on and so forth. By the way, okay, so Willow the movie, I gotta say, to this day, I don't know if this movie is good or not. I really don't. What I know is that as a kid, I loved it.
Yeah.
And every kid I knew besides me loved it. We just didn't have that many of these kind of fantasy whimsical romps.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the movie reviews for it are terrible. Terrible. This was not a well-reviewed movie.
Yeah.
I found out in researching here that the script was actually nominated for a Raspberry Award.
Awesome.
And I think that might have something to do with all the crazy names, fantasy-ish names that they use. There's a lot of them. This movie's very, very dense with, the castle, Tira's Lean, and so on and so forth, right? It's got a lot of that kind of stuff. But, I don't know, it's got Warwick Davis as Willow. He's a good actor. It's got Val Kilmer. How bad could it be, right? I don't know. I'm going to have to rewatch it again.
This is when Kilmer, I think, was sort of at the height of his powers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This was, I think, after Top Gun, unless I'm mistaken. So he was still riding that high. He was, he was a big deal for quite a while before his eventual kind of, swirl down the toilet.
Yeah, him and the other guy I always forget about is Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner was making blockbusters. Like
man.
in the late 80s, early 90s, I think.
Yeah, and another good NES game is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yes.
Based on the Kevin Costner Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. That's actually a pretty good movie game too for the NES. They weren't all terrible.
Yeah.
There are some good ones out there.
Yeah, people talk about Jaws a lot. Jaws is one I always hear.
I have never played Jaws on the NES.
People say it's pretty good. I think developed by, maybe, was it developed or published by Atlas? It was one or the other. Which is like secret Atlas game that I must own now. It was developed because it was published by LJN. I think that's why people were like, this is terrible. And then they were like, oh, it's pretty good.
That's hilarious because you're right. It was an LJN game, and that's why I've never played it. Because I'm like, LJN plus movie.
Yeah. Just a
I'm not going
recipe
within 10
for
feet
disaster.
Of that. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Lord.
Fun fact for Willow fans, actually. So in the movie, spoiler alert. In the movie, Mad Mardigan eventually gets together with Sorsha at the end of the movie. He brings her over to the good side, and then she fights her mom, Bavmorda, and then her and Mad Mardigan, they get together at the end of the movie. They fall in love. So it's not just the love potion.
Yeah.
In real life, Val Kilmer and the actress who played Sorsha, Joanne Whalley, or Whaley, I don't know how to pronounce it, they actually got married.
Oh, wow.
After filming the movie.
True love always finds a way. And of course,
until the divorce.
You married your NES after playing Willow, so it was a nice little...
Yeah, we had a very strange ceremony. But yeah, so back to Willow anyway, the game. The reason it's different, I think, from Zelda and Crystallis is that there aren't really any kind of puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Zelda has that thing where you see something off the screen and you're like, "Ooh, I wonder what that is." Willow doesn't really have very much of that, and it doesn't, like I said, nothing really in the way of puzzle solving. It's pretty much about exploration and combat.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of like, go find character X and they'll give you they'll give you item Y.
Yeah.
In order to get to like location Z.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, there's a lot of that kind of fetch questy-ness to it, which is probably what kind of sets it back a little bit.
Yeah.
But the combat, you know, it'll look really, really familiar to people who have played Link to the Past on the SNES.
Yeah.
The sword swinging in Willow is identical.
Really?
To Link, literally identical to Link to the Past. Yeah. You have like a standing kind of wide sword swipe, and then while you're moving forward, he has more of a stab. There's also weight to the swords.
Mm-hmm.
So as you go through the game, you pick up a new sword and it's powerful, but Willow's not yet strong enough to wield it.
Okay.
You kind of have to level up a bit. You can still use all the swords, but what it means is that when you swing them, Willow does a really slow swing.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to be like, well, do I use this new sword with the really slow swing and, you know, kind of have to time it perfectly so I hit the enemies?
Yeah.
Or do I just use my old one that I can swing really fast?
Until I'm strong enough to use the bigger sword.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually kind of a cool addition. Like a lot of these additions in games, like any game that has food in it, like any RPG where you have to keep track of food, go away. I don't want it. Right? Like, why do I have to continually buy rations?
Yeah.
It's just not a fun mechanic. And so you'd think a mechanic where you swing a sword really slowly would actually, you know, you'd think that would hurt the game, but it's actually not too bad. It provides you with an interesting choice. And yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Just a side note for you, never play Dark Cloud.
Really?
Never play that game. I really enjoyed it. I'm playing the second one now, and this is a digression, but it'll be quick. There is a thirst meter in that game. So each of your characters has like an individual thirst meter, but you do always have to have water on hand, because if you let the thirst meter go down, then you'll start losing health.
Why?
And then on top of that, it also has breakable weapons.
Oh, man.
So it's a double whammy for you.
Man, breakable weapons and a thirst meter. Like, you're right.
Breakable weapons. The breakable weapons is really a swift kick in the nuts, too, because like the whole way that you progress in terms of your weapons is you level them up So every time you kill an enemy, you get like a certain amount of experience for them, and then eventually you upgrade them.
Yeah.
But if your weapon breaks, it's just gone forever.
Okay, but
and you lose weapon health on every swing. Like every hit that you make costs you weapon health.
But can you repair them?
So you can repair them.
Oh, thank goodness.
But like what happened to me a couple times is like your character has like a certain number of times. Like if you hit X 3 times, he'll do like 3 swings.
Mm-hmm.
And so each enemy does like a different amount of damage to your weapon. So if you find a new enemy and they're like really like a shelled enemy or something, you could swing and it could do like 5 damage to a 35 health weapon.
Oh.
And so like I would swing and then I'd be like, oh, gotta stop. And then I'd do one more swing and it'd just destroy my weapon.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It's just one of those things. Like the reason I thought of it was because just like with Willow and the slower swinging swords, like I think as kids, I really appreciated more the risk reward type stuff. Like I was so much more invested in like, okay, I'll figure this out and I'll get better at it. Whereas an adult, I'm like, I don't want any of this.
Yeah.
Like I just want it to be as streamlined as possible. Please.
Yeah, exactly. All right, guys, that's Willow. That's Flying Dragon. We'll take a break and we'll come back with a couple more. And we're back. And so we're just going to go real kind of almost rapid fire through some more games from our childhood. We're not going to go too in depth here, but I think we've got a few each here that we can touch on real quick. Arnie, why don't you start us off here?
When we decided to do this, I knew that GBA had to be featured.
Fair enough.
Like because GBA was such a big part of my childhood, specifically in the summers because I would go to camp. And I was that kid that like, oh, we're doing the mud run. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna sit here and play my Game Boy. Thank you. So Golden Sun was required. I don't know that we'll ever do an episode for this series. I don't know that it warrants one. But excellent Camelot RPG for the Game Boy Advance. Camelot was a developer that I think as a kid I didn't care about developers, and now as an adult I'm like, wow, like Camelot is a company that I really like.
Yeah.
They did for the listeners, they did the 2 Mario sports titles on the Game Boy Color, tennis and golf.
Yep.
And those also had like RPG light sort of elements in them. And Golden Sun is, I want to say, probably their magnum opus at this point. Like I don't want to speak too highly of it, but it's an excellent little series that honestly gets, weirdly enough, a lot of love.
Yeah. Like
Isaac, the main character from Golden Sun, is always like, we want him in Smash, and I'm like, that's great. Like I love that people remember him. It was interesting, too, because I got both of the games. So Golden Sun 1 and 2 were originally supposed to be one game, but it was so big that Camelot had to split it in 2.
Yeah.
And I remember as a kid, like, playing the crap out of Golden Sun 1, getting to almost the end and not being able to beat it. And so I did the kid thing where I'm like, oh, I'm stuck, so I'm going to play the other one now.
Yeah.
And like immediately spoiling myself what happened at the end of the first game. Because it picks up right after the end. So I was like, oh, okay. I guess that happened. I guess I'll be mildly confused for my entire Golden Sun 2 playthrough. But no, that's if you I don't know if you've ever played Golden Sun.
Sadly, I have not. No.
It has like a very unique and entertaining art style. Like playing it on a Game Boy Advance is kind of criminal now. Like you have to play it on like an SP or a micro.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're a monster. But it has like gorgeous animations, and it does the thing where like when you do a summon, it has like a cutaway scene that's like crazy. And then the most like unique thing about it, I would say, is the Jin system, which is basically the way your party works is you can pick up these little creatures from around the map and like during certain battles and stuff that are called Jin. And each one of them is attuned to an element. I believe there's 4 of them. There's the blue water, the red fire, the brown earth, and the purple wind. And so each of your characters can carry like a certain amount of them, and your sort of class and your powers are defined by the Jin that you're carrying. So I was very basic when I did it. So like one guy had all the red, one guy had all the purple, the girl had all the blue, blah blah blah. But if you mix them up, you can like create hybrid classes and like have like a healer who also has like tanky powers, or have like a DPS guy who's also like does debuffs and stuff like that. And it becomes really interesting. Like it's a really cool way of like making you want to collect all of them.
Interesting. So did you feel like you had to catch them all?
Yes, it was definitely that Pokemon feeling. It like hit me around the same time. Like Pokemon, I think I'd played a few years prior to this, but when I picked up Golden Sun and this was like a feature, I was like, this is what I've been training for my entire life. Like I'm prepared now. And the more you have, the bigger and crazier your summons are.
Yeah.
So it was great. It was a great little RPG for the system.
I'm glad that Camelot was able to put out more RPGs after the Shining series, because they just like, it's like you said, they have that distinct art style. It's very colorful, very very evocative, and with the GBA they have a little bit more muscle to work with. Perhaps they can do like those kind of animations and stuff. Even back with like Shining in the Darkness on the Genesis, when you cast magic, it's very well animated. Everything, it just looks really good. Camelot is, man, they hired some really talented people there.
Yeah, they did a good job. And then Golden Sun also had a release for the DS, which I also played and I loved. But the story is like kind of on a cliffhanger-y. It's not a full cliffhanger, I don't think. It's just sort of unresolved.
Yeah.
Like they're like at the end, it's like, and then
and
there's no crickets, like.
See.
So hopefully eventually we'll get a Switch release or something.
Yeah, I don't see that happening personally, but
probably not.
See, if you're gonna do that, maybe do it like the game that I'm gonna talk about, which is Final Fantasy 2/4 for the SNES. This isn't exactly a hidden gem, This is a known quality at this point. But when I was a kid, oh my god, this game was absolutely mind-blowing. I borrowed it from my cousin. He got it, and he hadn't yet finished it. In fact, I don't think he had even really played it. He just got it, and he brought it over to my house. And we played it, and I was like, oh my god, can I borrow it? And he was like, yeah, sure. Because at that time I had Street Fighter 2, and he was always desperate to play Street Fighter 2. So gotcha. I lent him Street Fighter 2, and I played Final Fantasy 2, I don't know how many hours. I think I got 5 hours into the game, like that evening.
Yeah.
And it was just absolutely mind-blowing. Like, the music was unlike anything I'd heard before. And then eventually when I did get the game and I played it all the way through, so many, like, mature beats in the story that game hits that just never happened before. From Tella basically, like, killing himself to get revenge. Like, that, when does that happen? A love triangle? What? These kind of things just weren't seen in a game. So that was definitely a game that really, like, hit me. And to me, still to this day, man, it's my favorite Final Fantasy. I'm not going to say it's the best. Yeah. I could make a convincing argument as to why it is. If somebody put me in a debate class. But I'm not going to say it's the best. But it is my favorite, absolutely.
I 2 is one I have not played yet. I have not been able to play it yet. But all I ever hear about 2 is how good it is, and then immediately followed by like, but it was on the Super Nintendo with Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy 3 and Secret of Mana and on and on and on. Like it's crazy how dominant Square and Enix were in that generation, that like
bonkers. Between
the two of them, like the entire JRPG catalog of that system is like just names that like just titles that they worked on.
Yeah, it really is. I'm not going to put the but there. I think it's just straight up better than Final Fantasy 6 or 3, you know, depending on how you look at it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people disagree, and that's fine.
Yeah. I don't know, man. It's crazy to me, I think, to think back on that time and just think of a game that's like, wow, this was a masterpiece. And had it come out at essentially any other time in video game history, or even on another platform, it'd probably be one of like clearly the top tier RPG for that system. But because Square was so into topping themselves, I guess, they were just like, we're not done yet.
Yeah.
And so here you go.
Yeah, exactly. But good for them, right? Because that really, you know, Final Fantasy 2 was the one that really kind of set the pace, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, what, you got another one there?
I do. This was one, I couldn't decide if I want to talk about this one next or after the other one, if we have time for it, but I want to talk about it now. And it's one that I know we'll never do an episode on. But truly for me, Mr. Mosquito is childhood distilled. Mr. Mosquito. Let me tell you, Paul. This was the same person's house that I played this at, that I also played Knights of the Old Republic at. Yeah. So two completely different sides of the coin here. But Mr. Mosquito, I don't know if you've ever played it. But it's sort of a, I don't even know how to describe it. I guess action game? Question mark? Where you play as a mosquito who is sort of torturing this Japanese family, the Yamadas.
Yeah.
And so basically in every level, you have to suck a predetermined amount of blood from specific points on the body of whatever family member you are facing. So the first level, you're like in the teenage girl's bedroom. The second level, I think you're in the kitchen with the mom. The third level, you're in the living room with the dad, so on and so forth. Yeah. And like, you just see, like, I've never finished the game, but like, even in the little interstitials in between levels, what you're really seeing is the disintegration of a family unit as you slowly drive them insane. They just come up with more and more elaborate ways to try to kill you.
Yeah.
And eventually when they fail, they just become so much angrier at each other because they just can't, like, they can't stop you.
Oh my God.
But it's great. I mean, the controls are, you got to get used to them. Like, they're very clunky. But it's such an interesting game too, because you play as the mosquito, so everything is enormous.
Yeah.
Like, this was like, when people talk about Shadow of the Colossus, I was like, this was my Shadow of the Colossus. Like, the first level, the girl is like 100 times the size of you.
Yeah.
And she like tries to like kick you and like smack you around. Like, you can get slapped and killed. Like, if you spend too much time trying to suck someone's blood, they will notice and they will smack you and like immediately kill you.
Yeah.
But oh Lord, it's just, I can't say enough good things about Mr. Mosquito. Such an insane game that more people need to play.
Yeah, I've always wanted to play this game because it just looks so unique, and your description is selling me on it even more. Like, just the fact that you're a mosquito and you're harassing people is hilarious, but the fact that the family is being destroyed.
I can only assume that at the end of the game, they either kill each other or file for divorce.
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine what else could happen to this family.
I really got to give it a shot while it's still semi affordable, because that's another one that, I guess because it's so unique, you know, it commands a fairly high price on the secondary market. Well, I'll go on to mine. And I guess we'll wrap it up after this one, because we're starting to get a little bit long here. One more for me, Road Rash for the Sega Genesis. Let me tell you, man, that game, I was obsessed with it. And not only obsessed with it, but like I had like this love-hate relationship with it. So, you know, you play it and you get through the first couple of levels and things are fine, right? Like you're learning how to play it. It's not too hard and all is well. You know, it has kind of like these, I'm not going to call it an RPG element, but kind of RPG element where like there's characters in the game that you fight against and there's cops that you know by name, and you can, you know, you can collect money and upgrade your bike, you know, get a new bike and so on and so forth. And you will need faster bikes in order to make it through later levels. And then this weird thing happens with Road Rash where you get to level 5 and you get the fastest bike in the game, which also simultaneously is one of the most fragile bikes in the game. And so you're getting through these levels that are like, I don't know, 15 minutes long. And you're 10 minutes in, and it's super fast and super difficult, and you're just managing to hang on, and then bam, you hit a car and you get wrecked.
And you wreck.
And so for me, it was like this, like I said, love-hate relationship where I loved the speed of it. Like the animation, it wasn't 60 FPS, it wasn't F-Zero. It was pretty choppy, but it still kind of created enough of an illusion of speed that you can feel how fast it was. And it has like hills and huge jumps, you know, not to mention the fighting. The fighting's a whole other thing. But yeah, like the secret to it, honestly, is like that last level where I got so pissed off at that game at one point. I don't think I've mentioned this on the show before. I got so pissed off at Road Rash that I punched my Sega Genesis. And you know how the... And you know how the top of the Genesis is like the circle, like the Model 1?
Yeah.
The circle kind of like cracked and caved a little bit.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It still worked. But I was like, oh God, oh God, oh God. I can't believe it. I hope it's... And yeah, ladies and gentlemen, Road Rash, right? Like that's what it did. There were games that I played on the NES that made me throw the controller against the wall. That wasn't, by the way, that's a thing people joke about. No. Those things happened. We all threw our controllers in frustration with these fucking 8-bit, 16-bit, you know, sadistically challenging games. But Road Rash was the only one where I actually punched the system and did damage to it. I still love it though. I still have super fond memories of it.
Yeah, I was similarly obsessed, but with Road Rash 2, that was the one that I got. And so I've talked about previously how I never owned a Sega Genesis, just a Sega Nomad.
Yeah.
I entered the cool zone right away, immediately. I didn't have time to dilly-dally. But so... And also, like, I don't know if the original Road Rash is like this, but Road Rash 2 is like the giant cart. Like, you know, the ones that are extra tall and have like that little yellow tab on them?
Electronic Arts games all kind of had that, yeah.
So just imagine me, like, I don't know, 10-year-old Arnie sitting cross-legged in the living room, hooked up his Sega Nomad to the AC wall because otherwise I could not play it. With a giant Nomad in my hands, with also a giant cartridge sticking out of the top of the Nomad. Like, peak 90s, like, peak 90s entertainment here, people. And so I remember, like, being obsessed with that game for a good chunk of my childhood, where I would play it incessantly, and I never got good enough to really progress past, like, you know, the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 races. But I remember, like, I specifically remember the point where I fell in love with it was when a guy was driving up to me with a pipe, and I managed to take it from him.
Yes.
And then beat him with the pipe.
So good. When you can do that.
And I was like, this is the greatest game ever invented.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, that's basically kind of how you get weapons in the game, right? Because there aren't any weapon drops. Like, you're not picking them up off the ground. You have to steal them. And then when you do, oh boy, there's nothing like like backhanding with the pipe or the bat. Oh man, it's so satisfying. Yeah, that game's great. Eventually,
there was also...
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, similarly, there is nothing more frustrating than when I wrecked and my guy just went flying, and then I had to watch him, like, in 2 frames of animation, running back towards his bike as everyone else just flew by me.
Yep, and you watch your perfect race just fly away. Oh just my evaporate. God, so frustrating. But I'm smiling. I mean, I'm smiling talking about it. So there you go, man. Road Rash. I think we'll probably do an episode on the Road Rash series at some point. It might be cheating a little bit to talk about it now.
I would think so.
It's actually not even the first time I've talked about it on the show, now that I think about it. But nonetheless, that was probably... It might have actually even been my favorite Sega Genesis game that I owned. Like... You know, I had... Yeah. It's so hard to say because there were so many good ones, like the original NHL Hockey, Streets of Rage, Phantasy Star 2. But, man, something about Road Rash. Like, there was just something about it that I was so impressed by. It was so much fun. And yeah, I love that one. So, anyhow, that pretty much wraps it up for this episode. And to our listeners, I really hope you enjoyed it. Because this is one of those where, we did put some work into it. I'm not going to lie. There was some work put into it. But until we actually do an episode like this, I'm never really sure how it's going to turn out. So I hope you guys enjoyed hearing us reminisce about some of these old games and maybe learned a thing or two as well. I'm certain that we brought up facts that people didn't know about, like the wall jump and Flying Dragon, the series, and so on and so forth. And maybe maybe some of you guys have played some of these games and got a kick out of listening to a couple of jackasses talk about them for a little bit. So again, everyone, thanks for listening. You go ahead, Arnie.
I was just gonna say, I feel the same way as you do. Like, I really don't know how these things are going to be received when we're not doing... Like, when we're doing the thing that we're comfortable in, I'm always like, this is good. This feels right. Yeah. When we sort of deviate, I'm like, I'm hoping for the best. But I don't know. I think I'm never happier talking about video games than when we talk about the ones that we played growing up. There's always a sort of detachment, I think, that we feel when we do the regular episodes, especially when they're games that we're not super familiar with or we played when we were older. Like, going back to the games I played in my insane childhood, I'm just now realizing as I list every single game. Yeah. There's just something that feels nice about that.
Yeah, definitely nice. I like the regular episodes because even though there's sort of a little bit of a detachment, there's also a sense of discovery as well. Because we'll do, we'll take it back to the Technosoft episode that we did. There were a lot of Technosoft games that I did play and I loved, and that's kind of the impetus for doing the episode to begin with. Plus, they have a fairly interesting story. I would definitely check out that episode too, if I'm a listener. Hint, hint. But like also the stuff of theirs that we didn't know about, it was just really cool. Yeah, talking about that stuff as well. There's some discovery there to be had. In any case, this post-amble is going on a little long. So again, everybody, thanks for listening. Check us out, regionfreegamers.com. And don't forget, talk to us on Instagram is mainly where we are, at Region Free Gamers Podcast. On Twitter, we are at Region Free Gamer. And if you enjoyed the show, please, by all means, tell a friend about it. And above all else, if you can leave that review, really appreciate it. And if you already have, you're awesome. So, Arnie, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
And thanks everybody for listening. Take care.